I don't think there's anything wrong with using assets in your comic. Let me get that straight with you right off the bat. I really don't think it's wrong to use assets. They can be useful, they can save you time, there's lots of reasons to use them. Obviously use them legally. Don't go stealing assets, okay? Now, some people do have objections to using assets, assets you can buy off any kind of digital store. Some people are purists. They think that you need to draw everything by yourself, by hand, and not using assets is the only way to learn how to draw everything, and you must be able to draw everything yourself. And there are benefits to this. For example, not using assets in your work, drawing everything yourself, you can build your skill up as an artist, and you can make things align together stylistically a lot easier if you're making it all yourself. And some people love assets. It saves them time, it allows them to add things quickly that they wouldn't be able to create otherwise, and they can put out more work faster. They can update more frequently. Now, I think most people are kind of in the happy medium between the two. I don't think there's a moral debate here at all. I think they're both valid points of view. I think that as someone who makes comics, I often care about putting out work quickly, but I also, in my heart, I'm a little bit of that pedantic purist who wants to be able to draw everything and encourages other people to do that. So I have a little bit of a bias, but I am fighting that because there really is nothing wrong with assets. However, I think there's some valid points to be made about some assets being bad and some asset use being bad. Sometimes they are a crutch. They stand out in your comic. They can look weird. We all know about the webtoon horse as much as we love that horse. So I'm going to discuss a little bit more about kind of what to do with assets, when to use them, what to avoid with them, and hopefully help you make a decision if you're going to use them, continue using them, or do more hand-drawn stuff. But before I get into that, I want to quickly remind you to tap the like button, like this video. It would help out our channel a lot. It would make me really happy personally, and hopefully it means that you get more wonderful content about making comics in your feed. Thank you for tapping that button. That was really sweet of you. Alright, so when should you use assets? 3D assets, 2D assets? When do you use them? When do you avoid them? I think a great way to start is by thinking of your comic project as having a budget. As independent creators, a lot of us are doing this as like on the side or as a hobby. We don't really have a budget. You're kind of doing this when you have time. But I think what you need to realize is that even though you don't have, say, like a publisher or a studio who has a budget in mind that they're holding over your project, you do have a budget, and that budget is your time. If it's not money, it's time. It's both. So I think it's important when you're looking at your comic to consider how much time you can budget into creating it. Sometimes it is necessary for you to use a lot of your budget on one page. Sometimes you have a page where it's like, I have a vision, I need to spend a lot of time on this page, it's a really important page for my story, the art needs to look great, I need to hand draw everything and make it perfect. Not every page is like this in your comic. There's a lot that can honestly have shortcuts. The reader will skim over it. It's not as important, but obviously there are points where you may need to invest a large part of your budget into them. They're very important. They're like the money shot, as it were, in a movie. What are you spending all your big effects budget on, Now, obviously, there are times like that, and, as I was saying, there are times when you really don't need to put much budget in it. You can cut corners. You can use some bad CGI, as it were. You can put in some stock effects. So when you're looking at your comic, I think it'll typically be like page to page or panel to panel. Scene to scene is that's a lot of content to be replacing with all assets. So, but panel to panel, not every panel on your comic page needs to be perfectly handcrafted. There are obviously panels that aren't as important in conveying what information you need to for the reader, where you can use a little asset in the background and people will look at that panel for 2 seconds and it doesn't really matter. And that's totally fine. So when you're planning out your comic, you're looking at the next scene you have to draw, maybe the next chapter. Think about what panels can you cut corners with. I feel so rude saying cut corners, but what pages do you need to pour your budget into because they're really important for the scene or chapter, and what panels or pages don't need that much attention. I think understanding that for your story will help you decide whether or not to use an asset or to create something yourself, or to use a mix of both. If you have these things, these pages that need a lot of attention and love and craft, using assets for other aspects of that chapter, I think is totally fine, so that you can use that extra time on your big, beautiful pages. Another thing to consider is a concept I like to call save it for the Blu-ray. If you've watched this channel for a long time, you've probably heard me and Bones say it before, but I'll explain it again. So in television anime, I don't know if this is still the practice, but anime studios would have a limited amount of time to create an episode before it would air on TV. So there would be some pieces of animation, some shots that had issues. You could see that they were not the best quality because the episode just needed to get out the door and air. But what would happen is that later a Blu-ray would be released of this anime, and the studio would have a chance to go back, clean up these shots, make them look better for the people who are, collecting the Blu-ray. The animation would look a lot nicer. And that is the way Bones and I have really considered our comics. So we post them for free online, and eventually we compile the pages into books and print them. And what we do in that case is sometimes these pages would go out rushed. We had a date we really wanted to put this page out so that we could keep up with our update schedule. So sometimes pages came out not looking so great. Sometimes it was a skill issue, on my part, where I didn't know how to draw this thing, but the page had to go out, so it's going out. And then later, typically years down the line, I'd come back and I could fix up some of these things when we printed the book. So that's saving it for the Blu-ray. Sometimes you can sit down, you can put in assets in the background, and maybe when you take it and you put out your book, you can redraw some of these assets in the background. Or, I don't know, whatever you need to do to make them look better. That is totally an option. So whenever you're considering using assets, if you're on the fence, consider giving your project a budget of your time. Now, I think there are also some things you need to be aware of with assets. These are some common issues I've seen myself and I've heard other people warn about, complain about. One of the issues with assets, and I think this is why a lot of people call them a crutch or a shortcut, is that you come across a lot of the same assets throughout different stories. I know Bones has talked about the webtoon castle, where it's this castle asset that everyone has in their webtoon. It's a very generic fantasy castle. And there's other assets that have that same vibe, where it can create this kind of homogeneousness to comics where they all look the same. And some people that might not bother. It bothers me personally. I think it is really boring to see the same assets used over and over again. This could mean that you need to go to more unique sources to find assets that maybe not everyone is using, or really searching for assets that suit your story really specifically. But obviously if you're using assets, that might not be what you're getting out of them. So that's something to be aware of. That is criticism you may run into. Also make sure you have legal rights to the assets. I mentioned that briefly at the start. There are lots of places where you can get free assets. And I'd honestly recommend, if you have the time and you find an artist who creates assets that you use, throw them some money. Throw them a little tip every once in a while. I know it's hard because, we're all artists. We're all passing around the same $20, but people who create digital assets are artists too, and throw them a little coin if you have some. But anyways, I'm talking a lot about digital 3D, 2D assets, but this can go for photos as well. Make sure that you have the legal rights to use these things. You could get in trouble. I also think it's just rude to like take someone's work without their permission. So be mindful of that. And the last thing I would be very mindful of is sizing of these objects. So the example I'm thinking of specifically is I know a lot of people will use The Sims 4, not really as assets to put in their comic, but as reference points to draw from. So they'll make like a little room in The Sims and then use it to put their characters in and draw over it. Be careful with this. And I'm sure the same applies to other assets, whether it's like you're buying like a pre-rendered room and then drawing over it that someone's designed. There's always a danger of things being missized. The Sims in particular, the one thing I always think of is that chairs are sized really weird in comparison to the models of the characters, the Sims. The chairs are always huge compared to the Sims, and different assets are sized really differently. Some of them are really weirdly sized. So be very careful if you're using that. Again, the same thing could apply to just like a set someone has created. Sizing can be weird. Like the purist in me is like, well, if you learn how to do the perspective, you could make sure that it is all aligned. But again, that defeats the purpose of like saving budget by using assets. But anyways, be mindful of that. It can create some weird looking stuff. Now, I think continuing on that thought with using assets as like a reference or something to like trace over as a means of saving time, I think that can be useful as a tool as an artist. Again, especially if you're tracing over these things, make sure that you have the right to use them. Referencing them is very different. To trace over something is to like copy it completely. To reference it is to kind of remix it with your own artistic spin, if that makes sense. And I think you can use assets as reference. Again, being aware of, say, like sizing issues. You know, if you're using a 3D render of something, you're looking at someone's artistic interpretation of an object. Like, it's not going to be fully photorealistic, though some of them may try to get really close to that. This is an artist's rendition of something that is real. So you're always going to be probably looking at a simplified version of a real object. So that's something to just be aware of when you are using an asset as a reference. Now, there is a positive to this. I think it can make learning to draw something easier for artists. For example, looking at like a simplified version of something where the details have been stripped back, it can kind of let you look at like the really essential form underneath and learn to draw these things. Whereas if you look at, say, like the real life counterpart of it, sometimes you can get lost in the details. It can be hard to see the underlying structures. It can be hard to like just parse those details and be able to draw it yourself, where starting with a really simplified version of it that another artist has created can be a really great stepping stone to like learning to draw that thing. So there is value to referencing assets that another artist has created. I will say though, I think in tandem, I'm not saying don't use assets as a reference, but I think in tandem, it's also important to draw from real life. Drawing from life does give you more visual information. There's the same issue with drawing from photographs. Photographs can be very flat. Photos, just because of the way lenses work, depending on the lens used in the camera, it can be really flattened down. You can lose a lot of that, the volume of a shape. Whereas if you're looking at something with your bare eyes in real life, maybe not bare eyes, you could have assistance with glasses, that's fine. But anyways, looking at something with your eyes, our brains give more kind of visual information so we can understand like the shape and volume of an object, whereas looking at something through a computer screen, looking at a photo, these things can really... They're not bad. I don't want to say never use these assets, but it strips away visual information that you get more of when you look at something in real life. And obviously, there are things that you cannot see in real life. There's lots of stuff that I have to use photo reference for that I will not have the opportunity to see in real life. So you should study from life in tandem with things that you can see. For example, drawing people. You can always go people watch and draw them. You can draw yourself in the mirror. You can draw friends and family. And same with, you can draw your own room. You can draw your house. You can draw the scenery you have in the city or town, wherever you are. There's still lots of things you can learn from in real life. And you can draw those and use them as reference in tandem with digital assets and photos. I think it's also important to study from life because let's say that you have a chair. You have this chair in real life. Someone has also made a 3D model of this chair. You may find that the way the 3D modeler has interpreted the chair, they may have stripped away details that you wouldn't have when you draw the chair from real life. Maybe they kept some details in that you didn't find important, or they added something to give it a certain kind of character to it that you wouldn't have put in based on the chair that you have in real life. Drawing from life is important because it can teach you how to simplify things into your own style. It helps you understand an object fully instead of understanding someone else's interpretation of that thing. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm going in circles here. So yeah, I definitely promote drawing from life, but obviously drawing from assets is also fine. I also, while I'm here on my soapbox, I think it's also very important to draw from reference material and from life because I personally feel like it builds your visual library that you can just pull from your mind. There is merit to just looking at things. I think as visual artists, looking at things, experiencing things, you don't necessarily have to draw something to understand it and to be able to draw it in the future. But I think there is merit to drawing a thing because I think it does give you just like that little bit of extra visual information and you can extrapolate it onto other things. So if you draw, say, a couch, that could help you draw a chair. If you learn to draw bears, it can help you draw elephants. I don't know if that's actually true. Bones could tell you. He knows all the shortcuts to like drawing animals. But anyways, it builds that library internally to help you draw more things in the future. Anyways, that's my little rant as a little purist. A little draw everything yourself purist. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm like this. I will also quickly pause this video to advertise our Patreon. If you would like to improve your art and work with me as a disgusting little draw everything yourself purist, you can join our Patreon. We do have a tier where you can get one-to-one feedback with me. I can look at your art, I can look at your comic, and sit down every month and just give you really personalized feedback to help you improve drawing your backgrounds, drawing your characters, whatever it is you need. Please consider supporting us if that sounds like a service that would really help you. Patreon.com/McKayandGray. There we go. I did it. There's the ad. Now to my final remarks. So I think, in summary, assets are like anything. They're good in moderation. Personally, I dislike all comics looking the same due to assets. So I definitely encourage people to learn to draw things yourself. I think it opens doorways for you. It allows you to create more unique visuals, more unique storytelling paths. I think those are good things to do. But I am trying my hardest not to be annoying because having people constantly poo-poo on assets and using shortcuts and shorthands and saving time, like, there's a reason that people do it. And if it helps you get your story out when otherwise you wouldn't, I think that's a good thing. I think people putting their stories out, telling their stories, no matter what, you'll grow as a creator doing that. And I think it's really important that people share their stories. Comics are really fun and engaging and important, and whatever helps you get your story out there, that's awesome. So go forth and make your comics. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, make sure to like this video. And if you really like this video and want to see more, consider subscribing. I make comics. Bones makes comics. We make videos talking about comics. And we live stream 3 times a week. So you can catch us there working on our comics on stream and chit-chatting. Thanks again. Goodbye.